We're going to be hearing from this delightful man, Deacon David Marshall. And if you were here for the Holy Hour, it was he who gave us the benediction. Now, Deacon David Marshall is attached to St. John's Parish in East Coast Bays with Father John Webb, and he came to New Zealand via Johannesburg in South Africa about 3 years ago. I understand that Deacon David is the only deacon in Auckland at the moment, but you'll be interested to know, those of you who read New Zealand Catholic, and I know that all of you do, you'll have noticed a little bit on the February 24, March the 8th edition. There's a little quote from His Holiness the Pope from Vatican City. Pope Benedict XVI has given his support to the permanent diaconate, expressing joy and gratitude for the Second Vatican Council's revival of this important ministry in the Universal Church. The Pope was answering a question during a meeting with clergy of the Diocese of Rome. His Holiness said he favoured this ministry when he was Archbishop of Munich because it seemed to him to belong to the richness of the sacramental ministry. And the Pope went on to say at the same time, it can equally be the link between the lay world, the professional world, and the world of the priestly ministry. In this way, said His Holiness, you give witness in the world of today, as well as in the working world, of the presence of faith, of the sacramental ministry, and the diaconal dimension of the sacrament of orders. So it's an important revival, I think, in this part of the world. And just as an aside, I now live in the Bay of Plenty in Papamontauroa, and that's in the Hamilton Diocese. And we have 12 permanent deacons in our diocese, one of which is attached to our parish church. The parish priest in our parish is Father Michael Geelan, and the permanent deacon who is attached to our church is Deacon Henk Geelan, who happens to be the parish priest's father. And they are usually on the altar together, father and son. And the son is the priest, the father is the deacon. And I can't tell you how blessed we feel. It's a wonderful, permanent order that I think we are all going to benefit from. Those of you, who had a look at New Zealand Catholic, and this is February 10, 2008, volume 284, permanent deacons will be introduced in Auckland, and the man who is going to look after the training of those persons and the direction is the deacon that you will hear from immediately, Deacon David Marshall.
It's a number of years ago. In fact, probably more than 30 years ago, my daughter was about 4, and she had a friend with her one Sunday, and we made arrangements for the friend to come along with us to attend Mass. Now, the friend was not Catholic, a little Protestant girl, and during that part of Mass where we are invited to exchange a sign of peace, little Brenda was attacked by all the people around her with this noise, pss, 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 pss. But she thought she heard it, and I knew she had got it right when she came to me, grabbed my hand and looked up at me and said, "Pleased to meet you." So I thought this would be a wonderful way to start this morning, the start of this Eucharistic Convention on this Saturday. We had a wonderful start to it last night, but let's get to know each other. Why don't you just turn to the people around you and say to them, "Pleased to meet you." You know, just before we started this, and the people were filing in, and we had just had that wonderful hour with the Blessed Sacrament, I was wandering around out there, and I was trying to gather my thoughts, and I slipped into this room, and I was thinking about how I was going to address the gathering this morning. And a lady came in and she said to me, "I know who you are. You're going to speak today." And I said, "That's right." And she said, "Are you nervous?" I said, "I'm never nervous. I'm fine." She said, "Well, what are you doing in the ladies' room?" Now, I have, I believe, good reason to be a little bit nervous. Because, yes, I have done this sort of thing before in the secular world, and I have been invited since I've become part of the clergy to do similar things. But it's only in the last 6 weeks or so that I'm doing something which is brand new to me. And that is, because of the circumstances, I'm finding myself talking about myself and trying to explain myself. Now, this is unusual for me, and I thought, well, is this really what a deacon should be doing, what any clergyman should be doing? So I went to the Bible, and I looked for some guidance and some precedent. And in my favorite gospel, John's gospel, I came across the exact right thing for us and for me, and that is in John's Gospel, chapter 8. Jesus, through force of circumstances, had to talk about himself. And he does it so successfully. It might not be apparent right at the beginning, but as time goes on, you understand just how successful he was. So you will excuse me if I impart some information about myself, and particularly about the vocation of the permanent diaconate, because people in Auckland find it a bit strange. In fact, I was looking around and some of the people were frowning when I mentioned I have a daughter. Now, they obviously haven't read the program, or they haven't got to the page where I am. I am towards the back of it, so I'm the tenderfoot in this organization right now. But they see me as a priest. I can't tell you how many times people address me as father. I'm comfortable with that. I'm okay. If the occasion is right, I will correct them. Otherwise, I'll just let it go. But I'm pretty confident that after I have finished speaking here today, you will know that I am not a father. Let me explain just very briefly how the Catholic hierarchy works. And this is the way it was right at the beginning. And I'm talking about New Testament times. In fact, you read about it first of all in Acts chapter 6, where 7 worthy men were elected by the apostles. So if you want to be really picky about it, deacons came before the priests. But we don't like to tell them that too much, because they got a little bit nasty, because it was about the 8th and 9th century that the diaconate all but disappeared. The remnants of this permanent diaconate was that it was men who were on their way to priesthood. And the diaconate had disappeared right up until the time, the permanent diaconate, right up until the time of Vatican II. Now, the reason that it disappeared are many and varied, but I think one of them was because the deacons got too much power. They controlled the money bags. And if you control the money, you know what happens. So they made a lot of enemies, and this is why the permanent diaconate disappeared. But it was at Vatican II that they decided that We need to restore this, because in the early church there's something rather special. These deacons performed a valuable function, and they were not the apostles, although they carried out some of the functions that the apostles would normally do, and they weren't the priests, although they carried out a number of functions that the priests would do. And that is how Vatican II has decided to structure it today. They are not priests, they are deacons. They are called to serve. Not necessarily be in the background and not seen and just get on with it. They need to be visible, because the visibility of a deacon is a great sign to the church. Now, how do we get there? Well, not only do we talk about the diaconate this morning, but we also talk about what Jesus expects of each and every one of us. Because what he expects of each and every one of us is what he also expects of the deacons. Because the deacons come out of the community, and unlike a priest who also comes out of the community, the deacon remains rooted in that community. A priest in formation will come out and he will go into another brotherhood, certainly for the time of his formation, until his ordination. He will have stints to keep in touch with the people. But the intensity of his formation is such that he needs to spend time alone with his brothers and with God. A deacon spends all of his time in the community, even during the formation. So you can see that there would be some differences. And this is exactly how Bishop Pat is going to tackle the introduction of the diaconate in Auckland. We are going to keep it as a diaconate. We are not going to try and raise men who aspire to the priesthood. We are going to form men who aspire to the diaconate. And it's got to be close with Jesus. You know, back in chapter 8 that I referred to, it starts off, the beginning of the chapter, with Jesus being confronted by the Jewish authorities with a woman they had caught red-handed in adultery. That's quite something to be confronted out of the blue. They knew exactly what the law demanded. They knew how it had been from the time of Moses. They had no doubt of what their responsibility was with this woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. But they were being a little malicious. They were being very malicious. They brought this woman to Jesus, and while he was teaching in the temple area in Jerusalem, they said to him, "We've caught her, and what should we do?" Because they knew that if Jesus said, as they had heard him preaching before, "You must be forgiving," he would be flying in the face of the law of Moses. And if he said she must be condemned to death, he would be flying in the face of the law of the Romans, because they weren't allowed to do that. So here is the predicament. What does Jesus do? He now gives them something that they were not expecting, for which they had little answer. And we all know the story. Those of you without sin, you cast the first stone. And the crowd melted away. So we start off in chapter 8 with Jesus intervening in a different way to the way of the world. We have Jesus now introducing a whole new concept, this concept of a loving and forgiving God, who doesn't look at the outside, a God who looks deeply. Now, those who were witnessing this and saw other things and heard Jesus teaching, we are told in that chapter that they started to believe. And by the end of it, they had such faith in this man because his message was so powerful, his authority was so evident, they didn't see an alternative. And for 2,000 years, that has not been breached. Despite all of the attacks. Look at our gathering here this morning. If that had proved to be the wrong way, we wouldn't be here. And sad of all sadness, we wouldn't have deacons. This is the truth. At that time, the occasion of chapter 8 is where Jesus is talking at the Feast of Tabernacles. And part of that ceremony was to create a tremendous light in the temple, a light so brilliant that it would penetrate the darkness around and even enter some of the homes. It was one of the highlights of the celebration in Jerusalem at that time. And Jesus used this as well, and he said, I am the light of the world. People would understand what he's talking about. They would understand that Jesus was saying, I'm not just a light just here in Jerusalem, I am a light for the whole world. And from then and right up until now, we have recognized Jesus as the light of the world. But how do we plug into this light? What happens? You know, if I went off to one of the shops here and I bought a light bulb, I can claim to own a light. I can say, I have a light. I can read the Gospels and I can learn and be taught all that Jesus was teaching. And I can say, I've got it. I can shout out from the hilltops, Jesus is my Lord. I would believe it. And that would be as true as me saying, I've got this light bulb, I have the light. This is where deacons come in. Deacons, by their example in the community, they need to illustrate how that light truly becomes part of them. And there's only one way, that light that I bought from the warehouse down the road, there's only one way I can make that light work. And that is plug it in, and plug it into the right place. If I plugged it into a banana, it's not going to work. I need to plug it in to Jesus himself. He told us he is the light of the world. And deacons have to really understand this, so that not just stand up here and preach it, but live it and be seen to be part of the community. You know, I am so much part of the community. I do have a wife. I have 2 children. I have 5 grandchildren. My marriage is not any more sacred than anyone else's marriage. I'm a husband, and my wife is the mother of the children, and we have our relationship issues. You know, I've got to tell you, it wasn't that long ago, I was driving along the freeway here in Auckland, and I saw the blue lights in my rearview mirror, and there was a policeman behind us, and he pulled me over. He came up eventually. You know, they take their time when they pull you over. You sit there for a long time and you think, well, should I just drive off now? He eventually came to my window and I rolled it down and I said, "Officer, I've obviously, in your eyes, done something wrong. What is it?" And he said, "You have been exceeding the speed limit." And I said, "That is utter rubbish. I don't speed. I have my own speedometer here, and I check it. I am meticulous about it. I make sure if I do start pushing the limit, I pull back. I do not speed." He said, "Sir, I have the equipment in my car. Would you like to come along and have a look at it?" I said, "I don't need to look at it. I was not speeding. You got it wrong." My wife leant over, stuck her head up and looked at him and said, "Officer, please don't carry on. He's always argumentative when he's been drinking." I'm one of you. I am part of it. To plug into that light, in reality, the only way we can do it, and Jesus tells us this quite clearly, and he said it to that woman caught in adultery: sin no more. If we are without sin, we've plugged into the light. It's really as simple as that. We must believe Jesus when he tells us this, when he gives us this message. We must be without sin. Now, as Catholics, we know there's no big magic moment when we just have to say, "I am now without sin," and believe that our lives are going to carry on like that. It's not going to happen. We know that. And we have this wonderful sacrament, and it was such a delight for me to see so many people exercising their right in receiving that sacrament this morning. When you get the opportunity, do it yourselves. It's such a beautiful sacrament. This is what allows us to plug in. This is what allows us to be part of that light. We are going to sin. We are going to make mistakes. Any of you who are having difficulty with reconciliation, just look at those who do exercise that sacrament whenever they can, and look at the peace that they are able to enjoy. Don't take my word for it. You've got to try it. You know, my eldest grandson, he's only 5 now. He's just started school. But soon after we arrived in this country from South Africa, I wanted to make a big impression, and I wanted to give my grandchildren as much as I could. Those of you who are grandparents will know that grandchildren are quite different from your own children. I was told that God gives grandchildren to parents as a reward for having their own children. So here I was with my little grandson, and I said to his mother, my daughter, and I said, "Has he ever had an ice cream?" "No, he doesn't like ice cream." "Have you tried it?" "Well, no, but I know." I asked him, and in his little infant talk, he could tell me He doesn't know what an ice cream is. Yes, he's seen it, but no, he doesn't want it. We took him down to Browns Bay, and they have this ice cream shop there, and I bought a little cone for him. And I showed him how I was eating my ice cream. And of course, you put on that great big face of great enjoyment. Give it a try. He took his cone and tentatively put out his tongue onto the top of the ice cream. And of course, it was cold. It was different. He wasn't used to this. And he pulled back in alarm. But then he thought about it. Now, hang on, there was something there. And he tried again. Well, as you all would know, it didn't take long. I am now spending a fortune giving ice creams to the grandchildren. This is what we need to do. We in the community, we deacons, we need to encourage others to try it. And you won't be disappointed. Because it is part of our experience. We are not seen as something high and mighty. I still regard priests in great awe. I think the life that they lead, what they teach, what they have to put up with, because I'm seeing it from inside, is something to be admired. I don't expect anyone to admire me. I hope people would see me as a deacon, not as some mini priest. I hope people will see me as a deacon who is part of that community and is sharing in everything. But here comes a difference. Part of the vocation of the diaconate is for them to be part of the hierarchy. The hierarchy of the church is bishop, priest, deacon. That's it. All the other bits and pieces that come in are all one of those: a bishop, a priest, or a deacon. The diaconate has been so successful in the world up to now that of the clergy, deacons, permanent deacons, make up 7% of the clergy. You might say, well, that's not a lot, because priests are 92% and bishops are 1%. But it's growing. It's growing, and it will grow more if people understand what the diaconate is. And a deacon serves as a clergyman. He serves in the liturgy. And this is something I'd like to just explain, just as the final part. The diaconate and the liturgy are so important. Because when we come into Holy Mass and a deacon is serving on the altar, this is a sign of that service. You see it right at the beginning. Those who were at Mass last night would have seen it. And if you were not familiar with deacons, you probably thought, who's that important man walking next to the bishop? It was just me. I'm serving the bishop. And if I'm celebrating with a priest, which will be the case tonight, I will walk alongside the priest in the entrance procession. It's not an indication of high office or of importance. I am there to assist and serve the bishop, the priest, the celebrant in the Holy Mass. During the Mass, you will see all sorts of signs taking place. I will do my very best not to look like a priest. I'm wearing the vestments, so it's easily confused. But if you look carefully, you will see I am not wearing a chasuble as the priests do. If I took it off, you would see my stole. The stole is not as a priest would wear it. He wears it round his neck. It is a sign of great office. A deacon, being part of that clergy, wears the stole on the left shoulder and gathered in on the right. That leaves his right hand free to perform that service. You see the symbolism of it? The dalmatic that I wear over that has sleeves, so I'm not encumbered by the loose flowing cloth of a priest. During the liturgy, all the parts where the people are invited to join in with the liturgy, canon law tells us it is the duty of the deacon to get the people to join in. So right at the start, it was the deacon who would say to the people, before we celebrate these sacred mysteries, let us call to mind our sins. Well, we don't do that anymore. There's a big theological argument on it, but it hasn't changed the principle of what a deacon does. What a deacon does is read the gospel, and I love this bit, because people are always shocked, mostly the priests. When I say, if a deacon is on the altar, the deacon and only the deacon can read the gospel. Oh no, the priest must always read the gospel. No, only the deacon. What about the bishop? Only the deacon. A good priest friend of mine went across for a big celebration in Rome, and he was specially invited there, and this was a big celebration with Pope. It was John Paul II. And the priests were starting to fight amongst themselves who was going to do the reading, and of course they all wanted to take the gospel reading. And apparently the disappointment and the absolute horror of so many of them when they learnt that none of them could do it. The little deacon who was going to creep in later into the ceremony, he was going to do it, and no one could take it away from him. This is how it is. It's a great symbol. The big symbol of the diaconate is Christ washing the feet of the apostles. He's there in service. Peter said, "Oh, but you can't do that." Oh, yes. If you don't let me do that, you cannot be my disciple. A deacon is going to proclaim the gospel. He is going to give that service to the people, to the whole church. And that is his duty in the liturgy. It's a big, big sign. I think my parish priest is quite happy on a number of occasions when I say, "Sorry, Father, I won't be at Mass." Oh, yeah, he can do the gospel. The other big moment, and this is something that probably won't happen either, because I think it is only right that the people do get involved, but the duty of the deacon is to proclaim the prayers of the faithful. You can see the symbolism there, the sign of the people being joining in the celebration of the liturgy. And here is a great part. And it's something that there are a number of dioceses I've read about who have abandoned this one for whatever reason. And I will do everything I can for it not to be obscured in this diocese if I have any sort of influence with the bishop and his advisors. The pinnacle of the Mass is straight after the consecration. The elevation, the first elevation of the priest with the blood and the body of Christ. My Lord and my God. At the height of the church's celebration, at the heart of our faith, the deacon proclaims in a loud voice to the people, "Come on, people, this is it. Join in. Let us proclaim that mystery of faith." And the people join in. It is the deacon who is part of the community from the altar inside the sanctuary, bringing the two together in a most stupendous way. It almost seems downhill after that. He will invite the people to join in the church prayer, the Our Father. He will invite the people, after the sign of peace is offered to the people by the priest, and this is Jesus giving us that peace. We've now received the peace, and the deacon says, as part of the people, let's exchange that sign of peace. And at the end of Mass, he will invite the people to depart. Not go back to your old lives, but let's leave and take what we've got out of this celebration, and as one, let's love and serve the Lord. So the dismissal is by the deacon, and these are the signs of what he gets involved in out in the parish with the people. Now, all of this is going to be explained in greater detail as we gather all of our resources, get all of the people together, both those who will be responsible for the formation of these men and the men who are now going to come forward, and their wives and their families, and it's going to be different. It's going to be a great blessing for the church. The evidence of this is the early church. The evidence of it is right up until the 4th century, when the diaconate was strong. The evidence is since the 1960s, where in 131 countries around the world, deacons serve, and the church is enriched. So this fits right in with the theme of this convention: hope. We are full of hope that the Spirit is going to enrich our communities, enrich our lives, and one of the instruments is the permanent diaconate.